I'm now really pleased to introduce our panel on fighting food waste in urban centers and really highlighting how cities are at the forefront of creating change on food loss and food waste and really taking the lead when other sectors of government haven't and other sectors haven't been able to make the same sort of positive influence. Our moderator for this panel will be Eillie Anzilotti, the Assistant Ideas Editor at Fast Company. Our panelists include Elizabeth Balkan, the Director of Policy at the Office of the Commissioner, the New York Department of Sanitation. Christine Datz-Romero, the co-founder and Executive Director of the Lower East Side Ecology Center. Monica Munn, Senior Program Associate at the Rockefeller Foundation. Antonio Reynoso, a District 34 Council member from the New York City Council. And Jilly Stevens, the CEO of City Harvest. So please join me in welcoming them all to the stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone, great to be here. So I think to start off, it would be really useful to jump in and start looking at what about the food waste issue is particular to cities and what particular challenges cities face in addressing food waste. So maybe, Monica, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, happy to, and great to be here with everyone this afternoon. Hopefully everyone had a lovely lunch. We all live in a city. Well, for those that live in New York, we work in a city, we buy food in our cities. And food waste really touches so many dimensions of the issues that cities care most deeply about. So you think about it first from an environmental perspective. Many cities, including New York, are really concerned and focused on reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, getting to zero waste. Food is part of that. It's actually the biggest contributor to methane in our landfills. And as you think about all of the energy that is expended getting food from farms to our grocery stores and our homes in a city, that's a huge portion. So environmental impacts. Thinking about food security, and we have Jilly Stevens here who can certainly talk about that, but as we think about making sure that food ends up on the plates of all consumers, but particularly those in need, reducing food waste and making sure that all edible food is eaten and not thrown away or composted is a critical component. And then certainly economic. Food costs cities money to transport. Particularly depending on what your landfill tipping fees are, it can be quite expensive to get waste and trash out of a home or a business and into landfills, and certainly Elizabeth can talk a lot more about that. So I think, and then there's opportunities for economic development, lastly. We've heard some amazing examples earlier today around new business ideas and innovations that are happening. I mean, these are job creators for cities. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts released a report the end of last year. They put a landfill ban in place about 2 years ago. And they've seen 900 jobs created from that, around 175 million in economic activity that they can attribute back to that. I mean, those are big numbers, those are real. So as cities are thinking about ways to create new jobs in different communities, food waste solutions can be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elizabeth, can you give us an idea of what we're looking at when we talk about how much food is being wasted in New York?
Sure. So food waste makes up the largest single material in the waste stream. And what is organic is actually organic waste, which includes food waste, but also yard waste and food soil paper, is about 33 or 35% of the city's total waste. So we're talking about an enormous segment of the waste stream. And that is coincidentally over 1 million tons per year on both the residential side and on the commercial side. So well over 2 million, close to 3 million tons per year. That is, enormous in terms of the logistics and the costs and the operational needs and infrastructure to remove it. So part of our zero waste policy for the Department of Sanitation in New York City is designed to eliminate landfill waste. Nowhere is that more critical in the issue of food waste, not only because it's such a large percentage of the waste overall, but because we don't have, the kind of infrastructure locally to dispose of waste. It has to be exported 500 miles away, which is, insane. And the more that we can do, not only to make use of what's in our waste stream, whether it's compostable food scraps or recyclable materials, but more importantly to move up the waste management hierarchy towards waste prevention. That's how we get to zero waste, which is not only imperative from an environmental perspective, but as Monica's touched on, is really a crucial component for driving continued economic growth and viability and equity in New York City.
Right, yes. And maybe, Jilly, do you want to talk a little bit about what City Harvest is doing in terms of capturing some of the waste before it hits that stream?
So City Harvest has been operating in New York City for nearly 35 years, capturing great food that would otherwise go to waste and delivering it to a network of soup kitchens and food pantries. Right now, 1.3 million of our neighbors don't know where their next meal is coming from. Almost 1.3 million New Yorkers really struggle to put food on the table, and at the same time so much really great food is going to waste. And so using a fleet of trucks, we will capture that great food that's going to go to waste in New York City today and make sure it's on somebody's table very often the same day or within a matter of days. We're focusing on highly perishable food, so of the close to 60 million pounds of food we'll rescue and deliver this year, over half of it will be fresh fruits and vegetables. Really important. Some of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City are the same neighborhoods where people struggle to access that really good quality fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's really been a focus area for us.
Right, amazing. And Christine, for the food that is, about to go into the waste stream but isn't necessarily edible, I know you have a lot of solutions that revolve around composting. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure, yeah. As an organization that started composting in 1990, and I like to say in 1990, composting maybe was a little bit of a dirty word, and it's now a very sexy word, of course, and we're really happy about it. But so we really started by collecting food scraps at a farmer's market, and I think the important thing is really to provide opportunities for people to really embrace the idea to make it easy, maybe just a drop off for composting, but then also education about how they can compost at home or in the backyard, and to just really empower people to see that food waste is really a resource. It's not something that you want to throw in the trash, and it really helps you to reduce your carbon footprint, and it's that small thing that everybody can do to be more sustainable.
Mm-hmm. And Antonio, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the policy implications here. Like, how do we, from the perspective of city government, sort of like mandate these ideas that Christine was talking about?
So mandate is it's a dirty word. That's a
strong
dirty
word. That's a strong word.
Yeah.
There we go.
But it is part of the conversation, and we try to really think of comprehensive and just look at every single place that we can insert ourselves to assist in the greater good here. And it's very complicated, extremely complicated. And when you introduce it to folks, this idea, even though it's been around for a long time, is new to the majority of the city of New York. So we're working with the organics program. That's been implemented in the pilot areas. The success rate of that program itself hasn't been great. There's encouraging signs, but it hasn't been great. And that's composting. When we talk about food waste, it's another issue that's been, again, introduced to the majority of the folks recently. It's not going to be easy. I guess we are trying to push legislation in the city council that speaks to programs, for example, a food portal where people can go and know where the food is and where they can pick it up, try to make it more convenient. But if no one knows to go to the website, it'll be for nothing. And we're doing other things to make it easier for supermarkets and other locations to give food to City Harvest and figure out a way to do that. We know storage is an issue, a huge issue when it comes to food waste. We don't. I was talking to the panel earlier. We know we need to get a point A, B, and then C. It's very hard to get food straight from A to C. City Harvest is probably the most capable to make that happen. But outside of them, an organization that large and that organized, for the rest of the folks, there's no central location to store food that could be helpful in a day or two and so forth. The Lower Ecology Center and the work that they're doing, working with BIC or the Business Integrity Commission to understand that a lot of the way that this compost is moving and this food waste is moving is not actual carting, and people might not need licenses for that because they're profit folks doing it. So I guess what I'm trying to dive into is there's so many aspects of this that are extremely complicated, and I actually think that eventually we might just have to be bold and do things that are mandatory to get folks to just buy in.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, even everyone up here, we have government, we have nonprofits, we have small organizations. There's so many different players in the food waste space in cities. So can we talk about how maybe we can start to more productively collaborate across all the different sectors and maybe what some of the challenges are in doing so?
That's for me?
For anybody.
Well, I want to, because Antonio said we need to make it mandatory, and I agree, composting eventually needs to be made mandatory, but of course we also need to create that access for people to different programs, and I think the city right now is obviously rolling out a lot of curbside program in the outer boroughs with less dense population, and then also here in Manhattan trying different things with enrolling high-rises. And I think, I also think that the whole community-based movement that we have here in the city, which is very strong, needs to continue playing a huge role in all of that, because I think we are really the people in the trenches who can really get that message across, because mandatory writing tickets is not going to motivate people. I think people really need to have an experience with composting and understand it, and somehow get away from this stigma and just really understand how wonderful composting can be for the city. Everybody likes to see a green park. Well, guess what? Food waste can make your park greener. Mm-hmm. So making these connections, I think, is a huge opportunity for everybody to work together.
I would say when it comes to government, especially Department of Sanitation being a lead in bringing folks together and really making it so that we have policies that encourage, stopping food waste from happening, from occurring here in the city of New York, I think could be a really valuable thing for us. And I'm sorry, the Department of Sanitation is going to be the most important player because they know what works and what doesn't. They have statistics as to who's buying into things and how they're not. How they educate and whether it's working and it's reaching folks. With all that information and the army of folks that they have in that agency, I think that government should play an extremely high role and actually be a lead in making sure that we make progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's a continued role. I mean, Christine, you're touching on some of the amazing grassroots and local efforts that are coming, and that should continue to grow. And I think part of local government's role is also to help identify where things are working really well and how might they either enable and incentivize further replication of that, or help scale it or adopt it more formally into institutions. And I think, as a funder, we think oftentimes about our role as helping to, be it through research or demonstration projects or some capacity, how can we spark and sort of pressure test different ideas that might be a little bit too early to make a policy call on, but that we can work with a lot of the folks, up here on this stage and others out in the audience to sort of show how things might actually work, taking them from idea to practice. And then, those organizations, be it local government or large institutions, can come and adopt them and formalize them in the right ways. But I think there's sort of an interesting, we've talked a lot about today, sort of everyone has a role to play. And I think similarly, as we're talking about solutions deployment, that's a similar theme that we should all think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you, what are some of those programs or, beyond composting initiatives, what are some things that people are doing that really are working? If we could talk about maybe some bright spots that would inject some optimism here.
Well, at City Harvest, I think the incredible increase in awareness about the importance of really respecting the food that we produce, the increased focus on reducing food waste, we've seen that not only here in New York City, but we're seeing it across the world. I mean, we're hosting people from all around the world every month coming to learn best practices from City Harvest about how they can set up a similar program, whether it be in Greece, Portugal, Israel. We have somebody from New Zealand the week after next. I think that's a terrific bright spot that so many people across the world are really turning their attention to this issue, because it's one of the most critically important issues for us to think about.
I always like to plug Billion Oyster Project. If you're not familiar with them, it's a really phenomenal organization. They take oyster shells they collect them from restaurants, and then they dry them out and then put them back into the harbor where they are populated with oyster spat. And by doing so, they are, number one, taking a huge solid waste burden off of the plate of many New York City restaurants that would otherwise have to pay a carter to take those oyster shells away. But more importantly, what they're doing is helping to make our coast more storm resilient, more storm safe, and just cleaning the water, right? By having that kind of ecosystem back in the New York City harbor, it makes the water cleaner. Nobody's eating these oysters because they are meant to be water filters. So that's a phenomenal local organization that is really able to tap into, economic, social, and environmental needs for New York City, and really build capacity for the city to, and also they have a major educational component of their program where they're involved with the Harbor School and they're teaching children all about the work they're doing and the importance of it. So something like that, those programs are really vital for New York City.
Yeah, I mean, one, I would say, I think we've heard today, and certainly for those in the space, we talk a lot about the needs for better data and transparency around information. And I think that's probably going to be something we always struggle with in some degree. You're always going to want more detail. But one thing I think we're really excited about at the Rockefeller Foundation is a project we've supported with the Natural Resources Defense Council over the last year, where they've actually done baselines of how much food is going to waste in different cities. So New York City, Denver, and Nashville. And those insights are going to be coming out in some reports next month. And I think it will be really interesting for so many, not just cities, but a lot of organizations to understand what kinds of food are people throwing out? Why are they throwing it out? Where are they shopping to get that food? On the business side, how much of that food could have been donated? What's the infrastructure and capacity required to actually capture that surplus food and get it to those in need in communities? So I think that wealth of information will be such a great starting point for additional policy conversations. But then also tools around this. How do we help more cities do this kind of research and measurement? Because that is such a critical part in creating plans and targets around food waste reduction. Johns Hopkins University recently released a report saying this is impressive. They did a whole landscape of every city that had done any type of food waste or sustainability plan. And they found 32 cities in the US that have food waste somewhere in a plan. We have a few cities in the United States. So 32 is great, and I think a lot of those have come out recently, but there's plenty more that can be done on that. I think one of their findings was that very few had concrete targets around reduction. And so that, I think, is going to be such an important next step. And in order to set a target, you need to really have a much more granular understanding of how much is going to waste, what are your hot spots, so to speak, and what are the key solutions to addressing those.
Yeah, I think oftentimes, we've heard some of the issues that surround composting and organic waste diversion, in that, there is a fear and a threat that the idea that what you put in your bin is not going into a landfill, therefore it's okay to waste, could become reality. What we see in the Department of Sanitation with our NYC Organics program and in the experience we have with all of our partners is that for many people, composting is like the gateway drug. Yeah. And it's just like Monica's suggesting, once you start to actually see what you're throwing away, it's that trigger for awareness. And certainly I think the city and everyone up on stage, we're all doing our part and need to be doing our part to scale major solutions and to find the things and the partners who can really move the needle on this issue. But at the same time, so much of the progress that can be made in this issue is small and incremental and starts with one person and builds up. And so it might just be that if you are in a home and you haven't been doing organics recycling, but then you start doing it once or twice, that's when you start to realize how much food you are throwing away that could be eaten, which is something that is obviously important for your own household's well-being financially, but obviously ties into our environmental goals as well. So I think, again, going back to data, going back to looking in what's in your waste, and even looking at the brown bin as being really the entry point for a raised consciousness and small scale change that can trickle up to something much bigger.
And I think another really powerful incentive in really getting people to think about the issue of food waste in cities is really being able to see the benefits just beyond, say, somebody's own wallet. So what say if a city like New York is able to really make some more strides in tackling food waste, what could be some of the benefits that we're looking out for, some of those metrics, maybe that you were saying around, like if we're able to collect more data or anything along those lines?
Well, I'll always go back to no neighbors who are struggling to put food on the table. There's a lot of great food that will go to waste that's perfectly edible that we can connect to hungry New Yorkers. While we want to continue to drive down food waste in the first place, in many ways it's not the right thing to characterize that way. It's food that's produced to excess, that's still perfectly edible, that a family are going to enjoy today. We know that 1 in 5 children in New York City struggle with food insecurity. Let's get that food to them. Let's make sure they can get off to school with food in their stomachs, ready to learn. That's got to be a great thing for the city all round. Driving that hunger number down would be really important.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit before, and Elizabeth, highlighted a great organization, $1 Billion Oyster Project. But I think the opportunities for this to advance sort of the circular economy agenda in New York City is really exciting. We should be focusing on prevention first and foremost, and then making sure all the food that is good can be either donated or made into products that can be consumed by people. And I think there's really exciting business innovation that's happening, and as we talk about new tech hubs coming to New York and FoodWorks and all these amazing programs that are supporting the entrepreneurial community here, I think there's a real opportunity for us to both expand those types of models, but also think more holistically around how all of our waste streams can actually be contributing back into our built environment, what we're consuming, so that we really sort of change our consumption model in here. But that's like my longer term vision, but since you asked.
Yeah, I also think it's just really economic opportunity, because if we really do something else but put things in a landfill, we can create so much more jobs, like 4 to 8 jobs can be created instead of 1 job at a landfill. And I also think that there will be really jobs where people can proudly work and really make a difference, because I think a lot of people want to engage in something that makes, that they feel good about. And I think we need to diversify what kinds of jobs we have here in the city, and I think composting and food waste prevention is huge, could make a huge impact.
I know you said staying away from the pockets issue or the money, but we have to talk about the fact that we spend over $300 million sending trash to a landfill. And if we figure out a way to reduce the food waste, that money can go back to doing something different in the city's budget, which can speak to after-school programming, expanding pre-K or 3K, and all these initiatives that we want to take on as a city that really speak to progress for young people, seniors, and so forth, and speaking to folks that don't have food on their table. We could really divert that funding to somewhere else that could play a more valuable role in the city of New York. So I guess detaching the money from it, we can save money and spend it somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been focusing a lot on New York, and obviously New York is a global leader, so it makes sense, and we're here, so we should be talking about it. But what is the potential for really sort of getting some collaboration going with other cities, really opening up channels of communication in other places? Jilly, obviously we were talking about how there's a lot of global interest in City Harvest, but what are some other opportunities to really spread these ideas to other cities?
Yeah, well, I mean, luckily there are a lot of great networks of cities that already exist. So Rockefeller Foundation has funded 100 resilient cities with 100 cities across the world working on resilience. There is the C40 Food Systems Network, U.S. Sustainability Directors Network, the list goes on. But I think the point is, from my engagement with them, we've been so excited and energized to see food waste is an issue across the world. And also, it's so interesting, you talk about procurement in a city, you talk about urban agriculture, a whole host of food systems issues, and somehow food waste weaves itself in there. And it's also great, a bit to your point on the consumer side, Elizabeth, also for a city, food waste is such a visible issue, and it's a good starting point for dealing with maybe some more contentious or intractable food systems issues. And so I think, looking at collaborations between cities, some of this is already happening in these types of networks which share best practices and knowledge. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to think about how do solutions that may make, we always talk about if you can make it work in New York, then you can find ways to adapt it in other places. And I think that is true to some degree, but local context matters. And so I think also finding what are the types of solutions that can be sort of replicated, generally speaking, but then on what levers does customization really matter? And local engagement and buy-in is so critical. And how do you get that input?
Yeah, and I would add that I think city-to-city exchange is critically important, and these networks are an invaluable resource. I think so too. What you're seeing with food waste, and where certainly there's a massive potential, is in bridging the rural-urban gap. I think there's obviously been a huge trend in recent years towards local food, towards farm-to-table food, but table to farm is the other half of that equation. And I think, even looking at New York State, we are a state that has one big city and then a lot of, mostly rural areas and some smaller cities. For the state to be viable as a whole, the economy, the unique economy of New York City can't be emphasized alone, nor can the economy of the more rural parts of New York State be emphasized and promoted alone. There has to be a regional coordination and cooperation, and food waste is, I think, an area where I think the interdependencies and interreliance, or the reliance on between the rural and the urban area, is actually full of opportunity, and something which is relevant for the entire country. So I think we're moving away from this idea of cities being surrounded by suburbans, and that really is an economic hub for regions, and really more and more thinking about how farming is part of our vital a vital nationwide economy, and rural support for rural communities, and the two need to go hand in hand. I think that, and I think that the economics of food waste and food production is how we start to bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's time to open it up to questions if anybody has any from the audience. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So we've heard a lot over the course of the day about waste from farms, schools, homes. Haven't really heard about supermarkets much, and haven't seen them represented on the panel. I don't know if anybody is here in the audience. Can you comment on the role, the contribution of supermarkets to the food waste issue and their potential role in addressing it, or in any of the programs that you all are talking about?
Well, I know in New York City, City Harvest really works very closely with the supermarkets, with most of the supermarkets in the city, to capture the food that they would otherwise send to landfill. And we find them incredibly cooperative. Many times we depend on the managers of the different departments within the supermarkets, but our truck's on the road every day of the week, and supermarkets are a really important part of our donation stream.
Yeah, so the city passed a commercial organics mandate in end of 2013. That law requires large food waste generating businesses to divert their organic waste and to make sure that it is source separated and doesn't go to landfill. Because of the somewhat limited infrastructure in New York City, certainly, but even in the greater region, the city is implementing that law in phases. And so we had a first group of businesses that were designated in 2015 to comply with the law. We've just announced in July a second group of businesses that will be covered by the law, which will include large supermarkets and retail food. So that is a new group of businesses which will be expected to take part in this program and to comply with the law. And there is a long period between when we made that designation and when the rules will be finalized and when they will actually have to comply and enforcement will begin. That won't happen for more than a year. But I think that's an important signal in terms of letting the industry know what's coming up, but also letting solution providers and food waste processors out there and developers out there know that this is not a trend that's going away, that it is definitely happening, and that there's a major opportunity for investment here to help businesses, help supermarkets, but all kinds of businesses find solutions. Obviously, they need places to take their food waste that are not landfill based, but they also need solutions to better track their food waste and to try to prevent their food waste or make sure that it's donated so that they don't have the cost of carting it away.
Supermarkets both in New York and certainly nationally have been a big part of the food donation sort of infrastructure and network. I would say though, there's opportunity to do more, and there's opportunity to donate more, particularly things like perishables, prepared foods, which just have sort of a different both food safety as well as logistical components to them. And so I think that from a donation perspective and food rescue side is sort of certainly the next horizon for these businesses to be thinking about. But then, on the prevention side, it's in their economic interest to focus on this. And so, I think you can look to retailers outside of the US in particular. A lot of the European chains, Tesco, for example, have been really pushing the needle on this and both making commitments but also taking action in their stores, and some solutions working better than others, but actually trying to publicize their failures or share learnings from those failures where possible. And I think retailers in the US similarly are also coming along and starting to have those conversations around what are changes that I can make in my staff training and how we handle produce and sort of how we lay out our stores. But some of this is also consumer driven. We all have expectations on what a grocery store looks like when we walk in the door and how much is laid out and how beautiful it all should be. And so I think we have to be realistic about how far ahead businesses are going to get ahead of the consumer. And so what can we also do in parallel to push on that consumer behavior change and expectations is really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Robert Nathan Allen with Grub Tubs from Austin, Texas, where we have a very aggressive zero waste initiative. One of the things we've seen being an issue is not that there isn't food that people are wanting to donate and people that are wanting to use that farms, but it's the logistics aspect of if we are putting more vehicles on the road for compost pickups and more vehicles on the road for food recovery, then we inevitably have more vehicles on the road. Can you speak to how logistics technology and having multi-use vehicles could play a key role in bridging some of these gaps?
For City Harvest, it's something we're very aware of, and 10 years ago, in fact, we launched a fundraising campaign with the support of a board member to put in place the country's first green fleet of refrigerated trucks, which is still on the road today. So we're very thoughtful about that and always striving to be as efficient as we can in the use of those trucks. In the time that we've grown from rescuing less than 30 million pounds of food a year to upwards of 60 this year, we haven't added any other trucks. I think we've maybe added one. So always looking for greater efficiency is really important, and we still have more to do. It's an important point.
And I know it's probably a very small addition to the greater picture, but we have organizations like BK Rot, which is uses bikes to move a lot of this trash around, or the compost around, for example, going business to business or trying to gain contracts through businesses to move their waste to a compost site. The young people, mostly young people, do it, get paid to do it a good wage, at least $15 an hour. So I know it's a small thing they do, but in my district, it's actually been it's been very successful. They've had to move to a larger site because they have they're composting more and they're getting more contracts. Now the limit for them is just the site. Where are we going to take all this? And so long as the more successful they are, the more difficult it's going to be. But they see themselves as a viable and real alternative to having trucks on the streets.
Yeah, I think there's also been, really obviously exciting developments with the shared economy, and I have to think that there's massive potential there. I think, if we were sitting on a stage 10 or 15 years ago, and someone said, "What if you wanted to, would you be open to letting someone sleep on your, living room floor?" It's like, no, that's totally disgusting. And now we, obviously shared platforms like Uber and Airbnb are so commonplace. So the idea of sharing assets to either get a service or a good that you need, get it more cheaply, get it more efficiently, has become something that's just a part of life. And I think there has got to be a crowdsourcing and an innovative and tech-based solution for food waste and for food rescue. I think oftentimes people, when they have surplus food, they don't have it at scale, and they don't have a huge window in terms of rescuing it. So, to have the city, for example, come up with a massive scheme or a fleet or infrastructure or warehousing, I mean, that is one option that could be pursued, but that probably would be the improper solution, and it wouldn't be sized appropriately to how food waste occurs, at the community scale, and the scope of the issue and the way that people interface with it. And so I personally feel like there's got to be there's got to be an app for that, and there's got to be a tech solution that's going to help bring together groups of people that know each other or don't know each other to try to get some of these things tackled. That doesn't require massive new fleet and resource heavy materials and infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Xenia Morin from Rutgers University. We haven't talked about fats, grease, and oil and as a part of the waste food stream. Is that... Sorry, let me repeat. We haven't talked about fats, grease, and oil as part of the food waste stream out of cities. And what is New York City doing, and what are the plans? Is it going to energy, or are there other things being done?
Well, we have quite an industry, unfortunately, just really picking up from commercial places that collect grease and then turn it into biodiesel. So we have a bunch of companies here in the city that do that. But yeah, on an individual level, people come to us sometimes and say, well, I have this grease at home, what do I do with it? And obviously you don't want to put it down the drain, you don't want to put it in the trash, and there is really no good solutions right now. So I would say, yes, it's a huge opportunity to think about how do we collect materials like this from individual households. It's an opportunity to work on.
Right. Reframe the question, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Bhavani Jara from IE Green. What about more incentivizing to farmers to donate? Like, I know there was a bill that Cuomo turned down for many years in a row. Finally, I think it passed this year, of like farmers to food banks, where farmers get a tax incentive to make a donation. And right now, I think what got passed was very limited, like $2,500 or something as an incentive. And more policies that encourage farmers and restaurants and whatever to have a tax incentive to help get them on board.
I mean, at City Harvest, talking with the farmers we work with and our food donors, people are incentivized by that sort of incentive to varying degrees. There are many New York State farmers we've worked with really since the very early years of our existence. And they're supporting us because they just don't want that great food to go to waste. Wherever we can, if a farmer is faced with having to leave a crop in a field because perhaps the bottom's fallen out of the radish market that week, we can incentivize them with a little bit of money. I would rather spend city harvest money incentivizing that farmer to get the radishes out of the ground than to truck in tomatoes from Texas or wherever they're being donated. So those are some of the levers we have at City Harvest to incentivize. And what's better than getting that great food so close to home onto the plates of people in New York City. So the tax incentive, I think, works to varying degrees, but anything like that is always going to help some people.
Yeah, and I think I think that's absolutely right, Jilly, and one of the bottlenecks is actually often labor to get the food out of the field and transport, and there are amazing local gleaning organizations that partner with farmers to do that. And so I think there's often how do you then, there's sometimes an information asymmetry, so how do they know when the farmer needs that? So how do you connect the dots more quickly? Because this is, these are not something you can I'll leave it another week and it'll be fine. It's I need to get these out of the field today, and then I need to get them very quickly to somewhere that can store them at the proper temperature or process them. And I think value-added processing, be it on farm or at a point of aggregation, is also really interesting. There are some great models that are doing that, and then either that food can be sold as a product and the farmer gets an additional source of income, or can be donated to a food bank and are shelf stable. They can be held onto for longer, can be used in different ways by the end client. And so I think there are some great models that are happening across the country around that also can be explored as ways to both provide better economics, but also keep the product in a way that is still healthy, but also has a longer shelf life.
All right, I think we have time for one more, though, in the back.
Hi, I'm Kimiko Link. I work with EPA Region 2, and EPA is very heavily invested in food waste from an environmental perspective. And we have many resources that we've put together and tools. One of the struggles that we have, though, is just trying to connect the dots. I mean, there's so many great activities and projects that are going on that we're learning about daily. And I was wondering, for the panel, what do you think is the best way to help us all learn about what everybody else is doing and how we can all work collectively together? One way that we've tried to do that is with this wasted food opportunities map that we just launched, where every potential food waste generator is on a GIS layer in addition to all potential recipients. So it's just a start. We'd like to get a storage layer, GIS layer, but and these forums are vitally important. But do you know of do you have any thoughts on other ways that we can connect the dots?
So that's a fabulous question, and amazing to hear about that map. Actually, a great tool that EPA, along with USDA and about 12 other organizations, including the Rockefeller Foundation, launched earlier this year is called Further with Food, which is an online platform that aggregates and houses, be it research reports, toolkits, maps, and all sorts of other resources when it comes to reducing food waste. And so if you haven't engaged with the site, I highly recommend it. If you have tools that don't live on it, you can submit them. I mean, this is supposed to be a growing body, and obviously this is such a dynamic space that there is new research and tools being created all the time. But that's a great way, at least from an information's perspective, to try and understand sort of what's already happening, where are there gaps that maybe my organization can help to fill, who might I want to connect with to learn from their experiences. So that's definitely a great place to start.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I forgot to mention that too. We also have the Food Recovery Challenge. If anyone's interested, we have some literature back here as well.
Great.
And I'll just go ahead and plug New York City's Department of Sanitation and Foundation for New York Strongest hosted the first ever food waste fair this summer in New York City. EPA and about 75 other food waste solution providers were there explaining and helping businesses understand what their options are, providing information and resources, mostly to New York City businesses, but other businesses in the region, everything from prevention to recovery to recycling. So the foodwastefair.nyc website is where a lot of these resources are living on for those who missed the Food Waste Fair, including an exhibitor directory, which shows kind of who was at the Food Waste Fair and what are the different services they provide. It's everything from waste audit consulting to compostable bags to software for tracking your procurement. And so that's a starting point, especially if you're a New York City business or looking to really get a grasp on what the New York City specific resources are. And that's something that we're looking to expand. So definitely check back as we kind of continue to build that out.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists. This was great.